June the 26th, 1284, Hamelin, Germany. The church bells of St. Boniface ring out across the morning air, summoning the faithful to Mass. But on this particular Sunday, their call goes largely unanswered. Something has gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. Through the cobbled streets, parents run wild-eyed, calling out names that will receive no answer. Mothers collapse against door frames, their legs no longer able to bear them. Fathers tear through their homes with desperate hands, under beds, into cellars, behind barns, searching for what they will not find. The town square fills with voices raised in panic, all circling with the same impossible question. Where are the children? 130 children. Vanished. Gone in the span of a single night. The eldest among them had seen 16 summers. The youngest, merely 4. No bodies were discovered. No blood marked the streets. No signs of struggle disturbed the morning quiet. Only empty beds remained, and a town full of parents who would spend the rest of their lives waiting for children who would never return. This stands as the largest mass abduction in medieval history, and more than 7 centuries later, we still cannot say with certainty what became of those children. Welcome back to Folklore Forensics, where myth meets true crime. Every week, we take a famous folktale, myth, or legend and investigate it as if it were a real criminal case. We look at the evidence, examine the victims, profile the perpetrators, and try to understand not just what happened, but why these stories have survived for centuries. I'm your host, Danielle Christmas, and today we're diving into a fairy tale born in the Middle Ages, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Many of us know the story of the enigmatic flute player who rid the town of rats, and then, when payment was withheld, led the children away in an act of terrible vengeance. This story has been softened into children's books, animated films, musical theater. But what most people fail to realize is this. The tale rests upon a foundation of historical fact, a genuine mass disappearance. Real children who truly vanished. Real parents who genuinely lost them. And the historical record, fragmentary though it may be, proves disturbingly specific about the date, the number of children involved, and the fact that they were never recovered. Today we will strip away the layers of folklore and examine what actually transpired in Hamelin in the year 1284. We will assess the evidence, consider the documented testimonies of witnesses, and attempt to reconstruct what truly happened to those 130 children. This is case file number 84, the Hamelin Abduction. Before we get started, I need to give you a content warning. This episode contains disturbing material, including the trafficking of children, forced labor, and violence. Listener discretion is advised. To understand the events of June 1284, we must first step back several weeks, perhaps several months. Because according to the historical accounts, the town of Hamelin found itself in the grip of a crisis. Hamelin in 1284 was a prosperous market town in Lower Saxony and what is now northern Germany. Positioned along the Weser River, it served as a vital hub for regional trade. The town supported a population of perhaps 3,000 to 4,000 souls, a substantial number for medieval Germany. They maintained a thriving grain trade, a beautiful church dedicated to St. Boniface, and a town council that kept meticulous records. But in the spring of 1284, Hamelin confronted a problem of considerable magnitude: rats. Now, you may reasonably observe that medieval towns invariably harbored rat populations. But according to the town records and subsequent accounts, this situation differed markedly from the ordinary. This was an infestation of unprecedented scale. Rats infested the grain stores, invaded the church, occupied homes, and swarmed the streets. The town's food supply faced decimation. Illness spread across the population, and we must remember the context. This is the 1280s. The Black Death lies only some 60 years in the future, and while the people of this era did not understand germ theory, they understood perfectly well that rats heralded disease. The town council attempted every remedy at their disposal. They set traps. They hired professional rat catchers. They offered bounties, 1 pfennig per rat tail. Nothing proved effective. The rats continued to multiply. And then, according to multiple sources, a stranger arrived in town. Here the narrative takes a turn toward the peculiar, indeed toward the deeply unsettling. The earliest written account of this stranger comes from the Hamelin Town Chronicle, maintained by the town council. The original chronicle from 1284 doesn't survive, a suspicious detail that we'll return to, but we possess copies and references from the 14th and 15th century that relate the same essential story. A man arrived in Hamelin in late May or early June of 1284. Contemporary descriptions place him in his 30s or 40s, tall and lean with sharp angular features. Multiple accounts make particular note of his clothing. He wore what was described as pied or multicolored garments. Some accounts specify red and yellow. Others mention patches of various colors sewn together. One account from church records describes him as wearing the garments of a fool or entertainer. But across every single account, this detail remains consistent. The man claimed he possessed the ability to rid the town of rats, and he demanded payment in advance. According to the town records, he met with the town council and the mayor, a man named Gottfried von Hamelin, and presented his offer. He would eliminate every rat from the town. In exchange, he required 1,000 guilders. This represented a considerable sum, the equivalent of a year's wages for a skilled craftsman. The council balked. Negotiations ensued, and according to most accounts, they reached an agreement. Some sources cite 50 guilders, others 100. The precise amount varies across sources, but this element remains constant. They struck a bargain, and they agreed to remit payment after he had eliminated the rats. The first warning sign you might observe. They declined to pay him in advance as he had requested. They promised payment upon completion. What transpired next enters territory that can only be described as strange. And we have to address these strange elements because they appear in the historical record, although we'll continue to consider rational explanations. According to every account, and I do mean every account, including the town chronicle, church records, and later testimonies, this stranger walked through the town playing some manner of instrument. Most sources identify it as a pipe or a flute. Some mention a horn. One account specifies a silver whistle. Whatever it was, the rats followed him. The accounts describe rats pouring forth from buildings, from cellars, from the grain stores. They followed this man through the streets, down to the Weser River and into the water where they drowned. By the following morning, the rats had vanished. All of them. Let us pause here to consider what might actually have occurred, because obviously supernatural rat charming falls outside the realm of possibility. First theory. This man was a professional rat catcher employing some form of bait or scent that attracted rats. We know that medieval rat catchers sometimes utilized animal musk or certain herbs that drew rats. He could have laid a trail of this substance leading to the river. Second theory. He employed some sound, though not magical sound. Some researchers have proposed that certain frequencies can agitate or attract rodents. Perhaps he possessed knowledge of this phenomenon and used an instrument capable of producing those frequencies. Third theory, and the one I find most plausible, he used poison, specifically a poison that induced extreme thirst in the rats. The afflicted animals would have sought water, leading them inevitably to the river. This would explain both why they all ended up in the water and why they died so rapidly. But regardless of his method, the results stand undisputed. He succeeded. The rats were gone. The town was saved. And the time had come for the council to honor their agreement. They did not. According to the town chronicle and multiple corroborating sources, when the stranger came to collect his payment, the town council refused to pay him the agreed-upon sum. Some accounts state they offered him 10 guilders instead of the promised 50 or 100. Others indicate they refused payment entirely, claiming that the rats would have departed of their own accord eventually. One account, preserved in a letter written by a Hamelin merchant in 1290, merely 6 years after these events, quotes the mayor as saying, quote, "The rats are gone. What need have we to pay for something already accomplished?" Consider that for a moment. They had made an agreement. He had fulfilled his obligation, and they simply decided not to honor their word. And the situation deteriorated further. According to multiple accounts, the town council did not merely refuse payment, they mocked him. They laughed at him. One account records that they called him a charlatan and a fool and ordered him to leave town. The stranger, according to these accounts, did not argue. He didn't issue threats, didn't create a scene. He simply regarded the council members and spoke words to this effect, quote, "You will regret this." And then he departed. This occurred in mid-June 1284. The precise date goes unrecorded, but most historians place it around the 20th or 21st of June. 5 days later, the children disappeared. June the 26th, 1284, a Sunday. This date appears with remarkable specificity in the historical record, which bears significance. Medieval chronicles didn't always maintain precision regarding dates, but this particular date appears in multiple sources with exact consistency. June 26th, the feast of Saints John and Paul. A warm summer day. The town prepares for evening mass. Children play in the streets, as was customary for a Sunday afternoon. Parents occupy themselves in their homes, at the market, visiting neighbors. And then, according to the accounts, the stranger returned. Multiple witnesses, and yes, we possess documented witness accounts, which we'll examine, reported seeing a man matching the stranger's description entering the town through the east gate around midday. He wore the same multicolored clothing, and he was playing an instrument. Here's a direct quotation from what's known as the Hamelin church inscription, which was carved into a stained glass window in St. Boniface Church around the year 1300. The window itself was destroyed in the 17th century, but the inscription was copied multiple times before its loss. Quote, "In the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, the 26th of June, a piper clothed in many colors led 130 children, born in Hamelin, to Calvary near the Koppen, where they perished." Let that settle over you for a moment. This isn't folklore. This is a church inscription. This is an official memorial to an actual event. So what transpired that day? Let's piece together the witness accounts. The most detailed testimony we possess comes from a woman named Greta von Hamelin, no relation to the mayor, who provided a statement to church authorities in 1285, less than a year after the disappearance. Her statement was recorded in the church records and subsequently copied into the town chronicle. Greta was in her 30s at the time. She had 3 children aged 8, 10, and 12. All 3 disappeared that day. Here is a portion of her testimony translated from Middle Low German. Quote, "I was in my home preparing the evening meal when I heard music in the street. It was a pipe or flute playing a melody I had never heard before. It was beautiful, haunting. I went to the window and saw the stranger, the one who had rid us of the rats. He was walking slowly down the street playing his instrument, and the children were following him. Not just a few children, all of them. Every child in the street stopped what they were doing and began to follow him. My own children, my babies, they walked past our house. I called to them. I screamed their names, but they didn't look at me. They didn't stop. Their eyes were empty, like they were asleep but walking. I ran into the street. Other mothers did too. We tried to grab our children to pull them back, but they pushed past us. They were strong, stronger than they should have been, and they kept walking, following that music. The stranger led them east toward the Koppen Hill. We followed, all of us, all the parents, screaming and crying and begging, but we couldn't stop them. And then they reached the hill, and they disappeared." Let's examine this testimony carefully because it contains elements that demand our attention. First, the empty eyes and the trance-like behavior. This detail appears in multiple witness accounts. At least 4 other parents describe the children as appearing bewitched or ensorcelled or as if in a dream. Now, we have to acknowledge that medieval people believed in magic and witchcraft, so we have to approach these descriptions with appropriate skepticism. But what if a rational explanation exists? First theory, mass hysteria or psychogenic illness. We know this represents a genuine phenomenon. In situations of extreme stress, groups of people, particularly children, can exhibit similar unusual behaviors. History documents numerous cases of dancing plagues and other mass hysteria events. Medieval Europe had access to various plants and fungi capable of producing trance-like states, henbane, belladonna. Third theory, and this proves darker, what if the children weren't in a trance at all? What if they went willingly? We'll return to this theory, but keep it in consideration. Now let's address what Greta stated at the conclusion of her testimony. They reached the hill and they disappeared. The Koppen Hill, also called Koppenberg or Calvary Hill in various sources, was a limestone hill approximately 1 mile east of Hamelin. It contained caves. This detail proves significant. Multiple sources mention caves or a hollow in the mountain. According to the witness accounts, the children followed the stranger to this hill and then vanished. Some accounts state they entered a cave. Others claim they disappeared into the mountain itself. One account states, quote, "The earth swallowed them." Here is another testimony, this one from a man named Heinrich Müller, a baker who numbered among the parents who followed the children to the hill. His statement was recorded by the town council in July 1284. Quote, "We followed them to Koppen. There were perhaps 50 of us, maybe more, all parents, all desperate. The children walked in a line, following the piper. When they reached the hill, they began to climb. There is a cave there on the eastern face. The piper entered the cave and the children followed. We tried to follow them into the cave, but we couldn't. It was as if an invisible wall blocked the entrance. We could see them going deeper into the darkness, but we couldn't follow. We screamed, we begged, we tried to force our way in. And then there was a sound like thunder or like a great stone falling. And when we looked again, the entrance to the cave was gone, sealed, as if it had never been there at all. We dug with our hands until they bled, but there was only solid rock. The children were gone." Let's take a moment to sit with that testimony. Imagine yourself as one of those parents. You've just watched your child walk into a cave, and then the cave ceases to exist. Now, obviously, caves don't simply vanish, so what actually occurred? First theory, cave collapse. Perhaps the stranger triggered a cave-in either deliberately or accidentally. This would explain the sound described as thunder and why the entrance appeared to be sealed. If a collapse occurred, the children could have been trapped inside. Second theory, there was no cave, or rather, the cave existed elsewhere. Perhaps the stranger led the children to the hill as a diversion, and while the parents focused on the cave, he led the children away from an alternate route. Third theory, the parents were prevented from following, not by supernatural means, but by accomplices. Perhaps the stranger employed people who physically blocked the parents from entering the cave. In the chaos and panic, the parents might have misremembered or misunderstood what transpired. But here is what we know with certainty. By nightfall, on June the 26th, 1284, 130 children were missing from Hamelin, and they were never found. The immediate aftermath descended into chaos. According to the town records, the mayor convened an emergency council meeting that same night. They organized search parties. They dispatched riders to neighboring towns and villages. They searched the Koppen Hill, the surrounding forests, the riverbanks. They searched for days, then weeks, then months. They found nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no trace of the children whatsoever. The town council offered a reward, 100 guilders, for any information regarding the children's whereabouts. They sent letters to other towns, to monasteries, to the regional duke. They even appealed to the Archbishop of Bremen. Nothing. In August of 1284, the town council hired a group of miners to excavate the Koppen Hill. They dug into the limestone, searching for the cave the witnesses had described. According to the records, they discovered several small caves and tunnels, but none showed any signs of recent use, and none led anywhere of significance. No children, no bodies, no evidence. The investigation continued for over a year, and then gradually it simply ceased. The town moved forward, or attempted to, but they never forgot. Consider this haunting detail. The town of Hamelin banned music and dancing on the street where the children were last seen. This prohibition endured for centuries. Well into the 19th century, it was considered disrespectful to play music on that street. The town also began dating events not from the year of Christ's birth, but from the year the children disappeared. Documents from the 14th and 15th centuries contain phrases such as, quote, in the 50th year after the departure of the children, or, quote, in the year 1334 being 50 years since the children were lost. This wasn't legend to them. This was defining trauma, the worst catastrophe that had ever befallen their town. And consider this as well. The town maintained meticulous records of the missing children. We have lists, names, ages, family names. These weren't fictional characters. These were real children with documented identities. Some of the names that appear in the records: Johann Müller, age 7, Greta Schmidt, age 9, Heinrich and Wilhelm von Hamelin, brothers, ages 11 and 13, Margareta Becker, age 5. 130 names, 130 children, gone. So let's discuss the suspect, the Pied Piper. Who was this man? What do we actually know about him? Frustratingly little. He is never named in any of the historical sources. He remains always the stranger, or the piper, or the man in colored clothing. But we can construct a profile based on the witness descriptions and his documented behavior. Physical description: male, 30s to 40s, tall, lean build, sharp features. Multiple sources note that he possessed a, quote, foreign appearance, though the meaning of this remains unclear. Some accounts describe him as having dark hair and eyes. One account mentions his having a, quote, cruel mouth. Clothing. The multicolor or pied clothing appears in every single account. This proves significant because in medieval Europe, clothing served as a marker of social status and profession. Multicolored or patchwork clothing was associated with entertainers, jesters, and outsiders. It was decidedly not normal attire for a respectable craftsman or merchant. Skills. He was clearly intelligent and educated. He negotiated with the town council, which indicates he could speak their language, Middle Low German. He understood contracts and payment. He possessed knowledge of rat behavior or rat-catching techniques. And he could play a musical instrument with sufficient skill to be memorable. Behavior. This is where the profile becomes particularly interesting. He remained calm, controlled. Even when the town council refused payment and subjected him to mockery, he didn't lose his composure. He didn't threaten violence. He simply departed, and then returned 5 days later and executed what was clearly a premeditated plan. This isn't the behavior of someone acting on impulse. This is someone who planned with care and waited for the opportune moment. So who was he? Let's examine the theories. First theory, he was a professional criminal, perhaps a confidence man or a thief who had perpetrated similar schemes in other towns. The rat catching could have served as a method to gain the town's trust and learn the layout, identify which families had children, and plan his abduction. Second theory, he was a recruiter for a children's crusade or a military campaign. In the 13th century, there were several children's crusades, movements in which children were recruited or abducted to be sent to the Holy Land or to serve in armies. Perhaps this man was recruiting children for some military or religious purpose. Third theory, he was a human trafficker. This proves dark, but we have to consider it. Child trafficking represents a genuine problem in medieval Europe. Children held value. They could be sold as servants, laborers, or worse. A man capable of abducting 130 children at once could amass a considerable fortune. Fourth theory, he was a cult leader. Perhaps he was recruiting children for some manner of religious or mystical group. The trance-like behavior the witnesses described could have resulted from indoctrination or manipulation rather than drugs or supernatural influence. Fifth theory, and this is the one that proves most disturbing, he was working for someone in Hamelin, perhaps someone on the town council, perhaps someone who harbored a grudge against the town or who stood to benefit from the children's disappearance. The fact that he knew precisely when and where to find the children, the fact that he was able to lead them out of town without being stopped by guards or officials, this suggests he possessed inside knowledge. Let's consider motive. Why did he do this? The obvious answer, according to the legend, is revenge. The town failed to pay him, so he took their children. Simple enough, we should think. But is it? Because consider this. If his motive was revenge, why didn't he demand ransom? Why didn't he send a message stating, quote, "Pay me what you owe me, and I'll return your children"? He didn't. There was no ransom demand. No communication whatsoever. The children simply vanished. So perhaps revenge wasn't the motive, or not the sole motive. Let's consider alternative possibilities. First motive, financial gain. If he was a trafficker, the children themselves constituted the payment. He could sell them for far more than the 50 or 100 guilders the town owed him. Second motive, psychological. Perhaps he was a psychopath who derived satisfaction from the power and control. The rat catching was merely a pretext for his true objective, abducting children and inflicting maximum suffering upon the town. Third motive, religious or ideological. Perhaps he believed he was saving the children from something. Perhaps he viewed the town as corrupt or sinful. They did, after all, break their promise to him, and he believed himself justified in taking the children. Fourth motive, he was hired to do it. Perhaps someone paid him to abduct the children. But who and why? We'll return to this question. Now let's address something deeply suspicious, the gaps in the historical record. Remember my earlier mention that the original town chronicle from 1284 doesn't survive? This proves peculiar. Hamelin was a prosperous town with a functioning government. They maintained records. We possess records from the 1270s and from the 1290s, but the records from 1284 to 1286, the years immediately surrounding the disappearance, those are missing. Not damaged, not partially destroyed, completely absent. Some historians argue that this is just bad luck. Records get lost, especially medieval records. But other historians find it suspicious because it's not just the town chronicle. Church records from St. Boniface Church for those years are also missing. Tax records are missing. Court records are missing. The pattern suggests deliberate erasure rather than the vagaries of time. What purpose would such destruction serve? The first possibility, concealment. Perhaps the town council or church officials bore some complicity in the disappearance, and they destroyed the records to obscure their involvement. The second possibility, the records proved too agonizing to preserve. Perhaps the town deliberately consigned them to flame because they couldn't bear to maintain such detailed documentation of their darkest hour. The third possibility, theft. Perhaps someone, the stranger himself or an accomplice, stole the records to prevent the town from possessing detailed information about the children or the investigation that followed. What proves particularly intriguing is this. We know with certainty that these records once existed, for later documents reference them explicitly. A chronicle from 1384, precisely 1 century after the disappearance, mentions, quote, consulting the town records from the year of the children's departure. The records existed in 1384. By the 1500s, they had vanished. What transpired in those intervening years? Another detail warrants scrutiny: the town's response to the catastrophe. They organized search parties, certainly. They offered a reward, but they also did something peculiar. They delayed reporting the incident to higher authorities. Hamelin existed within the Duchy of Brunswick-Lüneburg. The Duke held jurisdiction over major crimes. The mass abduction of 130 children would surely demand immediate notification to ducal authorities. Yet, according to the ducal records, which do survive, the Duke received no word of the disappearance until August of 1284, more than a month after the event. And the report came not from the town council, but from a traveling merchant who had heard rumors. Why this delay? Why did the town council not report it immediately? Some historians suggest embarrassment. They had broken their promise to pay the stranger, and now their children had vanished. They wished to avoid admitting their failure to the Duke. But other historians perceive something more sinister. Perhaps the town council possessed knowledge they preferred to conceal. Perhaps their involvement ran deeper than mere negligence. From a modern forensic perspective, what would investigators seek today? First, they would search for similar cases in the region. Were there other mass abductions or disappearances of children during this period? In fact, there were. Records from the late 1200s document children disappearing from several towns in Germany and the Low Countries. Not on Hamelin's scale, but in significant numbers nonetheless. Were these incidents connected? Did a network of traffickers operate throughout the region? Second, they would examine the town's financial records. Who benefited from the children's disappearance? Were there unusual transactions or payments during that period? Unfortunately, as we've discussed, those records no longer exist. Third, they would interview witnesses extensively, searching for inconsistencies. Here, the evidence proves remarkable. The witness accounts demonstrate extraordinary consistency. Everyone describes the same fundamental events: the stranger, the music, the children following him, the disappearance at Koppen Hill. Such consistency proves unusual. It suggests either truthful testimony or careful coordinated fabrication. Fourth, they would excavate Koppen Hill thoroughly. Modern ground-penetrating radar and other technologies could potentially reveal hidden caves or burial sites that medieval searchers overlooked. Fifth, they would pursue the stranger himself. They would construct a profile, circulate his description, examine records from neighboring towns. Did anyone matching his description appear elsewhere before or after the Hamelin incident? In fact, some evidence suggests he did. Records from towns in Westphalia and Saxony mention, quote, a piper in colored clothing who appeared in the 1270s and early 1280s, offering to solve various municipal problems, rat infestations, wolf attacks, and the like. Could this have been the same man? Was Hamelin merely one episode in a larger criminal career? Now let's consider something both fascinating and heartbreaking: the children who remained. According to the historical sources, not all the children vanished. A few were left behind. The exact number varies. Some sources indicate 2, others 3 or 4, but all sources agree that survivors existed. Why were they spared? The accounts offer different explanations. One child, a boy named Gottfried, was described as, quote, lame or physically disabled. He couldn't maintain a pace with the other children and was abandoned when they reached Koppen Hill. Another child, a girl recorded as Adelheid, was described as, quote, deaf and mute. She followed the other children but couldn't hear the music, became disoriented, and stopped before reaching the hill. A third child, a boy named Johann, was described as blind. He followed the sound of the other children's footsteps but lost them in the crowd. These children survived, and they provided testimony about what they witnessed. Gottfried's testimony, recorded in 1285 when he was approximately 12 years old, proves particularly detailed. Quote, I followed my friends as far as my strength allowed. My leg pains me and I cannot walk swiftly. I saw them following the piper. They were smiling. They appeared happy, as though proceeding to a festival or celebration. I called to them, but they did not answer. I attempted to keep pace, but I fell behind. By the time I reached Koppen, they were already entering the cave. I saw the piper standing at the entrance. He looked at me. He saw me clearly, but he did not beckon me to follow. He simply regarded me. And then he entered the cave and the other children followed, and I stood alone. That image, a disabled child abandoned, watching his friends disappear into darkness, proves devastating. But it also reveals something crucial. The stranger made deliberate choices about which children to take. He did not take those children. Why? If his motive was revenge, would he not take every child? Why leave some behind? This suggests he had a specific purpose for the children. Perhaps he required children capable of labor. Perhaps he needed children who could travel long distances. Perhaps he needed children who could be easily controlled and wouldn't impede the group's progress. This supports the trafficking theory. Traffickers are selective. They take victims who prove valuable and easily transportable. The testimonies of the surviving children also eliminate the other children's state of mind. Gottfried said they appeared happy. Adelheid, in her testimony, delivered through a translator versed in sign language, said the children were smiling and laughing. Johann said he could hear them singing. This doesn't describe children being abducted against their will. This describes children who believed they were embarking on something pleasant. What does this suggest? The first possibility, the stranger made promises. Perhaps he told them he was taking them to a festival, or to witness something marvelous, or to meet someone important. Children are trusting. They would have believed him. The second possibility, they were drugged or under the influence of something producing euphoria. Certain hallucinogens can induce feelings of happiness and well-being. The third possibility, they were subjected to psychological manipulation. Perhaps the stranger had spent time in the town before the rat incident, befriending the children, cultivating their trust. When he returned and summoned them to follow, they complied willingly because they trusted him. The final theory proves particularly chilling because it suggests extensive premeditation. It suggests the rat incident served merely as pretext, and the stranger's true objective from the beginning was the abduction of the children. Let's examine the aftermath for Hamelin itself. The disappearance of 130 children devastated the town. We're discussing approximately 10 to 15% of the town's population. The economic impact proved severe. Children formed an essential part of the medieval economy. They labored in family enterprises, assisted with farming, contributed to household income. Losing so many children meant losing an entire generation of workers. The psychological impact proved even more catastrophic. Multiple sources from the late 1280s and 1290s describe Hamelin as a town in perpetual mourning. Church records note an increase in deaths attributed to melancholy and despair, conditions we would now recognize as depression and suicide. Some families departed Hamelin entirely, unable to endure living in the place where they had lost their children. The population declined significantly in the years following 1284. Yet the town also achieved a grim fame. The story of the Hamelin children spread throughout Europe. It appeared in chronicles and sermons and songs. By the 1300s, it had become a cautionary tale about honoring promises and settling debts. And gradually, across the centuries, it transformed from historical tragedy into fairy tale. The story of the Pied Piper has been interpreted variously throughout history, and these interpretations reveal much about the societies that retold it. In the medieval period, it served as a story about the sanctity of promises. The moral, honor your debts or face dire consequences. In the Renaissance, it became a story about the dangers of strangers and outsiders. The moral, do not trust those you do not know. In the Victorian era, it became a children's story about obedience. The moral, heed your parents or misfortune will follow. In the modern era, it has been interpreted as everything from an allegory about the Black Death to a metaphor for the Holocaust. But what becomes lost in all these interpretations are the real children, the real families, the real tragedy. 130 children disappeared. Their parents never saw them again. This isn't metaphor. This isn't fairy tale. This is an actual crime that was never solved. Where does the investigation stand today? Officially, this remains a cold case, an extraordinarily cold case, 740 years cold. Yet historians and researchers continue their efforts to solve it. Multiple academic studies, archaeological excavations, and historical investigations have been conducted. In the 1950s, a team of German historians undertook an extensive review of all surviving documents related to the case. They concluded that the disappearance was genuine historical fact, not legend or myth. In the 1980s, archaeologists excavated portions of Koppen Hill, searching for evidence of the children. They discovered several medieval artifacts, but no human remains and no definitive evidence of what transpired. In the 2000s, researchers employed ground-penetrating radar to scan Koppen Hill for hidden caves or chambers. They detected several anomalies, areas where rock density differed, but excavation revealed nothing conclusive. The most recent investigation occurred in 2019 when a team of forensic historians analyzed all surviving documents using modern textual analysis techniques. They concluded that the witness testimonies were likely authentic and that the disappearance occurred essentially as described in the sources, but they couldn't determine what became of the children. So what do I believe happened? Based on all evidence available, here's my assessment. I believe the stranger was a professional criminal, possibly operating within a trafficking network. I believe he came to Hamelin specifically to abduct children, and the rat catching served as a pretext that allowed him to gain access to the town and study its layout. I believed he spent time in the town before the rat incident, befriending the children and cultivating their trust. This explains why they followed him willingly. I believe he had accomplices, individuals who assisted in transporting the children away from Hamelin. The cave at Koppen Hill likely served as a rendezvous point where the children were loaded onto wagons or boats. I believe the children were transported to Eastern Europe and sold as laborers or servants. Some may have survived and lived out their lives in foreign lands, never knowing their true origins. Others likely perished young under harsh conditions. And I believe someone in Hamelin possessed knowledge of this. Perhaps not the entire town council, but someone who benefited from the children's disappearance or who was compensated to remain silent. This explains why the records were destroyed. This explains why the town delayed reporting the incident to the Duke. This remains merely my theory. I can't prove it, but it accommodates the evidence more comprehensively than any other explanation I've encountered. Before we conclude, I want to share something with you. It comes from a letter written in 1384, precisely 1 century after the disappearance, by a Hamelin resident named Wilhelm von Hamelin. He was writing to his cousin in Bremen, and he mentioned the anniversary of the tragedy. Quote, "Today marks 100 years since the children were taken from us. My great-grandfather was among the parents who lost a child that day. He never recovered from the grief. He died young, they say, from a broken heart. We still remember them. We still mourn them. Every year on the 26th of June, we hold a memorial service at St. Boniface Church. We read the names of the children, all 130 names. We light candles for them. We pray that wherever they are, they have found peace. We will never forget them. We will never cease searching for answers. Even after 100 years, we still hope that someday, someone will reveal what happened to our children." 740 years later, we continue searching for answers. The Hamelin abduction remains among the most disturbing unsolved cases in history. 130 children disappeared in a single day and were never found. No bodies, no ransom demands, no closure for the families. The case remains officially cold, but it isn't closed. Historians and researchers continue their investigations. New documents are occasionally discovered. New theories are proposed. If you possess any information about this case, and I acknowledge the improbability given that it occurred in 1284, but if you're a historian or a researcher and you've encountered any documents or evidence related to the Hamelin disappearance, please reach out. You can contact me through the email address included in the show notes. And if you find yourself in Hamelin, Germany, visit the memorial. Visit the street where the children were last seen. Remember them. Remember their names. Remember that they were real children who deserved to grow up, to have lives, to be remembered as more than a fairy tale. That concludes case file number 84, the Hamelin abduction. But the story doesn't end there. Keep listening for a brief case epilogue on the afterlife of the town where this tragedy took place. In Hamelin today, the Pied Piper has become an industry. Tourists arrive by the busload to purchase chocolate rodents with marzipan tails, to photograph cheerful Piper statues, to attend puppet shows where felt children dance merrily, and the story ends in laughter. The gift shops overflow with commemorative plates and plush rats. The town square hosts festivals where actors in colorful motley lead crowds of delighted children through cobblestone streets. This is what tragedy becomes given enough time. A brand, a tourist attraction, a charming story to tell over dinner. And yet, walk through Hamelin's old quarter, past the souvenir shops and themed restaurants, and you'll find a narrow street where the children were last seen. The street without drums. The street where, 740 years ago, 130 children were last seen alive. The silence there is different. Not the absence of sound one finds in empty spaces, but a deliberate, cultivated quiet that has been maintained generation after generation as an act of remembrance. No music is permitted on this street. No dancing. Even wedding processions, I'm told, fall silent as they pass through. The laughter stops. People walk more slowly, speak more softly, as though the cobblestones themselves demand reverence. Stand there long enough and you begin to feel it. The weight of absence, the echo of small footsteps that never returned. You imagine them, those children, following the sound of a pipe down this very street, their faces bright with wonder, unaware that they were walking toward oblivion. You imagine the parents who ran after them, too late, their cries swallowed by distance. Next week, we'll reopen another case, examining legends and lore through the lens of true crime. I'm Danielle Christmas, and you've been listening to Folklore Forensics. Folklore Forensics is written and hosted by me and produced by Audio Ellis. Theme music is by the Soundlings and Josh Pan. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow Folklore Forensics on Instagram at Folklore Forensics. Please send future case suggestions to folkloreforensicspod@gmail.com. Until next time, stay curious and always follow the evidence.